In the previous episode, we saw Sophia suffocate the protagonist, and after that, she beat her for not obeying her orders and threatened her that if she didn't do as instructed she would be dead soon at Sophia's hands. The next morning, we see Rainon working as usual when he suddenly hears a knock at his door. The protagonist stands outside, asking permission to enter and apologizing for her lateness. Hesitation is written on her face, worried that Rainon might have heard the rumors, that she was the one who poisoned rice, and suspects her of being guilty. Rainon senses the protagonist's discomfort and gently directs her to focus on her work. Grateful, she thanks him and assures him she'll do the task with her full attention and dedication. For the protagonist, this is the safest place to stay, the familiar scent of paper. I can't remember the last time I felt so comfortable. No one is trying to find with my attitude. I don't need to analyze people's motives. The protagonist, after organizing the documents, she submits them to Rainon. Rainon looks into the protagonist's eyes and offers a compliment. I have always thought this, but you really are a focused and efficient worker. You are a great help to me. Even if you call it a simple task, your work is always neatly organized, down to the small details. As Rainon examines each page one by one, he can't help but admire the protagonist's accomplishments. Suddenly, a faint, unexpected sound breaks the silence, pulling Rainon's attention away from the pages. He looks up, surprised to see the protagonist with tears welling in her eyes. She seems as startled as he is, caught off guard by her own reaction. The praise, so rare and sincere, has touched her deeply, stirring feelings she hasn't felt in what seems like lifetimes. Since her reincarnation. Trying to regain her composure, she manages a shaky apology, though her voice catches slightly. Embarrassed by her vulnerability, she raises her arm to shield her face, feeling both exposed and comforted by the unexpected moment. She hadn't realized how much those words would mean to her, and as she hid her face. Seeing the protagonist in this vulnerable state, Rainon rises from his chair and gently reassures her. He tells her she shouldn't hold her feelings in for so long, reminding her that emotions, if kept bottled up, will eventually overflow. Taking out his handkerchief, he offers it to her so she can wipe away her tears. Unfortunately, Killian was standing outside Rainon's office, hearing every word, but with no understanding of the full story. His mind spiraled, consumed by dark and twisted speculations. In the quiet stillness of her dimly lit room, she's startled by the soft creak of the door opening. Her heart jumps as she sees Killian slipping into her room with the quiet grace of someone who's made it a habit. He steps inside, his gaze intense, and before she can gather her thoughts, he settles himself close to her on the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Killian," she murmurs, a mix of surprise and confusion threading through her voice. "What are you doing here?" He leans in, his expression inscrutable, though a trace of something unreadable flickers in his gaze, perhaps frustration, perhaps longing. "Why don't you visit me after work?" he asks, his voice soft but laced with an edge that catches her off guard. She blinks, his question catching her completely by surprise. I'm not sure what you mean." Her mind races, trying to decipher his unexpected behavior. This isn't the reserved, composed Killian she's used to. There's something raw in his tone, something that almost feels vulnerable. But he doesn't relent, instead giving her a faint, sardonic smile. "Isn't that your usual approach with men?" His words are light, almost teasing, but there's a sharpness underneath. Or perhaps, he pauses, letting the words hang heavy in the air. "You weren't satisfied last time?" She stares at him, utterly bewildered, her thoughts spinning. What is happening? She wonders, feeling her pulse quicken. Why is Killian behaving like this? His sudden intensity unsettles her, like a mask slipping, revealing a side of him she's never seen before. In the silence that follows, she searches his face for clues, but he remains unreadable, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that makes her feel exposed. The room feels smaller, the space between them charged with unspoken questions and hidden emotions. Killian is undeniably jealous of Rainon, because he's not the one who wiped her tear, it was another man. And what man would be comfortable knowing his girl was touched by someone else? Killian's eyes are filled with passion. The protagonist feels but nervous, both are looking at each other. Killian leans toward the protagonist and says, "You entered my room in a nightgown and kissed me in the middle of the night, and you are saying I misunderstood your intentions." The protagonist shows some hesitation on her face and tries to clear his misunderstanding. "Even that night, my plan wasn't to seduce you. Technically, I always wear a nightgown." As Killian draws near, his movements seductive, he begins to undress her, only to be shocked by what he sees. It's then he realizes how little he truly knows about her. She's not dense like Killian thinks. Unlike what others say, she is not malicious. She has a deep understanding of art. She delights in dishes cooked by the chefs at the manor. But when it's critical, she becomes calm and logical. No matter how others treat her, she responds with her head held high. Even when the odds are stacked against her, she uses logic to find a way out of the problem. In the end, she came up with a solution to the mystery that changed even the Duke's mind. It almost seemed strange that we always assumed Edith was behind everything. Edith was a proud woman, one who hid her pain even when wounded. She never showed weakness to Killian Rudwick, nor did she ever ask for help. Killian's inner voice was constantly leading him away from the protagonist, as though an unknown force were building an invisible wall between them. But even this mysterious influence couldn't disguise what was now right in front of him. Bruises covered her body, each one in a different shade, as if inflicted on separate days. Rage surged within Killian as he asked, "Who did this to you?" But the protagonist remained silent, bound by the unyielding conditions of the system, unable to reveal the truth. Her silence told him everything. If one of the Rudwicks had been responsible, she wouldn't have kept quiet. Only one person could do this to Edith, Sophia. The scene shifts to the next morning. The sun shines warmly over the palace courtyard, lighting up its tall windows and beautiful decorations. In the center, a fountain with a statue gently flows, surrounded by bright flowers. A red carpet leads up a grand staircase to the palace doors, adding a royal touch. The courtyard feels calm from the outside, but on the inside, the tension from the previous night still lingered in the protagonist's bones. We see the protagonist, who seems a bit tense because of last night's incident, Killian's cold apology replaying in her mind. He had mumbled it as he buttoned his shirt, his face a mask of distant regret, before slipping out of the room without another word when she fell back asleep. It was a restless slumber. But morning came with a surprise. As she stretched and brushed a hand over her arms, she noticed a cool, sticky sensation on her bruises. Startled, Edith realized someone had gently applied ointment while she slept, tending to her wounds with a surprising tenderness. Only two people knew of her injuries, Sophia, who gave the injuries, and the Killian. An embarrassment colored her face as she pieced it together. Killian must have returned in the dead of night to care for her, despite his earlier behavior. Lost in thought, Edith didn't notice the approaching footsteps until they were nearly upon her. Turning, she saw Killian striding toward her, flanked by a guard. His expression was resolute as he nodded curtly. "There's urgent business we must attend to," he said, his tone brisk. Behind him, the guard dragged Sophia forward, her hands bound, a desperate look in her eyes. Sophia stumbled to her knees, shouting in protest. "Count Reigelhoff sent me to guard my Lady Edith. What will become of her once you dismiss me? She needs me." Her voice shook with fervor as she looked pleadingly toward Edith. As she really care about the protagonist? But Killian's mouth twisted into a smirk. How laughable. You can't even manage the duties of a maid. You're useless to Edith. Sophia lifted her head defiantly. "I have served her since childhood. I have been trained as her lady's maid from a young age." Killian's gaze hardened, his eyes narrowing with contempt. And yet, this so-called highly trained maid failed to report the bruises on her mistress's body. Or to treat them, for that matter. In fact, the more I consider it, the more it seems you're the only one who could harm her without raising suspicion. Edith's heart pounded in her chest, a flicker of surprise and something akin to happiness swelling within her. Killian had deduced all of this. He'd seen her bruises last night and pieced together the truth. The realization was startling but strangely comforting. Sophia's voice trembled as she replied, "I didn't report them because Lady Edith hadn't mentioned the bruises. They're just small bruises." At her words, Killian's expression darkened. "Small bruises." His voice was low and cold. "Would you also like to be beaten until you bear small bruises?" He paused. "Edith is my bride," he continued, his voice laced with barely restrained anger. "It irks me that you thought I wouldn't notice bruises on her body, hidden or not. But clearly, the Reigelhoffs care for you dearly, since they begged me to send you back to them unharmed." Turning to the protagonist, he said firmly, "Edith, you have no say in whether or not we send this maid away." Speechless, the protagonist felt her cheeks grow warm. Was all of this really for her? She could hardly believe the intensity of Killian's defense. Finally, Killian called to another maid, Anna. "Anna, I trust you to care for Edith from now on," he said. He turned back to Sophia with an air of finality. "I'll see to it that you're delivered in the Reigelhoff carriage myself." The protagonist gets shocked by hearing that Reigelhoff sent a carriage for Sophia. Are they trying to make her look more suspicious? But before she could collect her thoughts, Anna, her maid, approached her with a gentle yet concerned expression. "My lady." Anna's voice was soft but resolute. "The protagonist. Would you allow me to see your injuries? I'd like to apply some ointment properly, if I may." Reluctantly, the protagonist removed her clothes, revealing the darkening bruises that had been hidden beneath. She didn't meet Anna's gaze, but she could sense the maid's reaction, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a step back as Anna took in the extent of the bruising. The shock was evident in her eyes. "My lady, why on earth didn't you say anything?" Anna's voice wavered between concern and frustration. "Why let things get this bad?" Edith found herself surprised by the warmth in her chest. Is she truly worried about me? It was strange, unexpected even, to feel this small spark of kindness directed her way. The scene shifts to a futuristic room, dimly lit with the glow of a high-tech screen. Sitting in a strange, sci-fi machine that looks like it belongs in a movie, an unknown figure stares intently at a display. The screen flashes a warning, clearly about something unexpected. "Stop rushing me, I got it," the figure mutters, frustration in their voice. "Things aren't going as planned. I've never worried so much about a character reaching the exception clause for level 1. They sigh, tapping their fingers impatiently. She was different from the beginning. Most Ediths feel lucky to be reincarnated as a wealthy person. They follow a similar path. First, they avoid being the villain by trying to be kind. Then, after entering Rudwick Manor, they fall for either Killian or Cliff, hoping to win over one of them and fit the plot of the story. But eventually, they face some scandal or reveal and realize how helpless they really are. They panic, and their lives spiral out of control. No one ever tries to logically argue for their innocence. The figure leans closer to the screen, watching something unseen. But this Edith, she's breaking away from the pattern. She's even gaining the trust of minor characters, the ones I have less control over. It's almost as if she understands that characters not in the original story can act freely. And she's not just kind to the people who might help her, frustrated yet intrigued. I thought she'd keep resisting, but then, out of nowhere, she gives in. And somehow, by doing that, she meets the requirements for the exception clause for level 1. The figure frowns, thinking out loud. With each exception clause she meets, the story's power over events weakens, at least for the smaller characters. But what's going on with Killian? With a burst of anger, they slam their hand down on the arm of the chair. Fine. This is my chance to make her shine even more. Edith is just a piece in the perfect story, but if she wants to fight back, that's interesting. Let's see what you can do, Edith number 13. They press a button, and a new message pops up in front of Edith, with a fresh set of conditions for her to meet. Only she can see it, and it's clear that her next move is now in her hands alone. The next day, the tension in the manor was hard to ignore. Cliff's angry voice echoed through the halls as he confronted Killian. So you just let her go? What were you thinking, Killian? Killian met his gaze calmly but looked a bit weary. We didn't have any real proof she was guilty. If we'd held her here, it would seem like we were bullying a maid from the Reigelhoff family. Cliff scowled. But you even sent her back in their carriage. She could have been involved in poisoning Rice. You should have kept her here and gotten some answers. Killian glanced at Rice, who stood nearby, looking withdrawn and tired. Look, Cliff, I had permission from Father to let her go. Besides, we never really liked her, and even Rice agreed. Cliff turned to Rice, frowning. And why would you agree to that? Rice sighed, sadness in his eyes. Because I don't want to think about it anymore. Whether it was someone from the Sinclairs or someone else in this manor, I already know someone here hates me enough to do this. I don't want to know who, it would only make things worse. Killian was glad Rice had supported him in front of their father, but he felt uneasy. If others found out how little Count Reigelhoff values Edith, our marriage deal could be in trouble. He thought about Edith's silence and how she seemed to accept everything without complaint. But why would a smart woman like her let things get this bad? Then it hit him, he remembered her strange request for surveillance, something that had puzzled him at the time. She wasn't just accepting the situation, she was using it, he realized, surprised. Edith wasn't simply enduring this, she was turning it to her advantage. Killian was so lost in his thoughts he ignored Cliff and Rice. Were they also there? Killian's inner voice is manipulated by the men who influence the story's main characters. He creates a sense of guilt in Killian's mind. Wait, Killian. Are you distracted by Edith when your sweet Rice is lying sick in front of you and you're smiling in front of Rice? Cliff asks Killian if he heard anything that Rice said just now. Rice stops Cliff to say something more to Killian. Killian apologized to Rice. Rice, it's okay, Killian. I am actually glad I don't need to convince you, and I was about to ask you to look after Edith. I kept thinking of her as I was healing. She must have suffered so much after drinking the poison. When I am ill, you two always stop by to see how I am doing. But she must have been all alone and in pain. That is why I want you to go and comfort Edith, Killian. For everything she has been through. Just treat her as kindly as you treat me. The scene shifts. We see the protagonist sitting anxiously in a dark room thinking Killian must have figured out the position I am in. My maid was abusing me. Then the Reigelhofs sent a carriage to ask for Sophia's safe return. He wouldn't have to be too clever to figure out what's happening. But even after realizing I was useless as a hostage, he didn't kick me out. Instead, he sent Sophia back to the Rudwicks. No one has mentioned anything, so Killian must have kept it a secret from the Duke. I guess I tutted on the heartstrings of the second lead. I didn't think it was likely the Rudwicks would kick me out right away anyway. I have a little bigger impact on the plot than Sophia. There are a lot of things that I have left to do. The novel wouldn't let me go this early. What worries me is that Sophia was supposed to be involved in a few more plot events, too. I wonder how I'm going to be blamed for what are supposed to be Sophia's schemes. I need to make sure I'm on my guard. I am not sure how much pity I earned from Killian. But I need to prove that I am harmless if I want him to pity me until the end. For now, he thinks of me as a woman who resorts to seduction when she has no other options. I will change his opinion of me. The next day at Rudwick Manor. Killian stands before the protagonist, his intense gaze softened just enough to reveal a hint of vulnerability. He extends a hand in a poised but genuine gesture, his deep blue and silver attire catching the light and adding to his regal presence. If you have time, I would like to invite you for tea, he says, his voice calm and steady. The protagonist stands in a beautifully decorated room bathed in golden sunlight, with intricate floral designs and elegant furnishings surrounding her. She smiles warmly, her expression bright and reassuring. Her long, auburn hair cascades over her shoulders, catching the light as she places a gentle hand over her heart. The protagonist denies Killian's request, radiating warmth and kindness. The next day, Killian finds her again, as calm as ever but with a new determination in his eyes. You always eat alone in your room, he says. Why don't you join me for dinner in the dining room tonight? She hesitates. But his grace still feels uneasy around me. I don't want to make him uncomfortable. But thank you for inviting me, she replies. Killian realizes she may not feel welcome around his father, who is still unhappy that Rice remains unwell. He thinks to himself, I was wrong, it needs to be just the two of us. The following afternoon, he tries again. The weather is nice, so I'm going for a stroll in the garden. Will you join me? She declines once more. The sunlight is still too hot. I'll stay indoors. Very well, he replies, keeping his disappointment hidden. Thank you for inviting me, she adds, trying to soften her refusal. As she leaves, Killian stands outside her room, feeling frustrated. Am I the problem? He wonders. What am I doing wrong? He isn't just inviting her because Rice asked him to. He still suspects she might be dangerous, yet he also sees a side to her that doesn't match the rumors. He's come to realize he needs to spend more time with her to truly understand her, but every attempt he makes is met with polite rejection. Suddenly, the protagonist opens her door and finds Killian still standing outside. What are you doing here? Weren't you going for a stroll? She asks, surprised. Caught off guard, Killian quickly comes up with an excuse. Some strawberry tarts from Peridot arrived today. Would you have some with me? It's a tempting offer. She's wanted to try those strawberries for a long time. But she resists the urge. Thank you, but I've gained some weight recently. I appreciate the offer, she says, giving a hasty goodbye before leaving. As she walks away, she tells herself, I can't let food distract me. No matter how much he tries, I won't let him win. I'm harmless and innocent, best left alone. I'll be like air, barely noticeable. On the fourth day, the protagonist sitting beside in Rice's room. Rice looks at her with a curious expression. Are you upset with Killian? The protagonist looks surprised. No, not at all. She says, though she pauses. Well, maybe a little bit, she admits. But, honestly, I'm more grateful than upset. I know he's been looking out for me in his own way. Rice raises an eyebrow. Then why do you keep pushing him away? He didn't say anything, but the maids have noticed. She sighs. Rice, I hope you can understand. Killian has sacrificed a lot for his family and the dukedom. Although arranged marriages are normal, he had to marry someone from a rival family. I don't want him to feel forced to spend time with me. In her thoughts, she adds, I can't tell her he's testing me. Every day, he offers me something new as if waiting for me to slip up. A quick flashback reveals all the ways Killian has approached her, each time with a new suggestion. If you're watching your weight, why not exercise more? Do you know how to ride horses? I could teach you, he'd said one day. Another time, he'd even stepped into Rhinon's office to keep an eye on her. Despite his efforts, she's determined not to give him anything suspicious to find. But as Rice watches her thoughtfully, she gently suggests, maybe you should try opening your heart to Killian, even just a little bit. As the evening draws on, Killian once again approaches her, his intense gaze fixed on the protagonist. I know you don't have any plans tonight, he says confidently. She raises an eyebrow and laughs slightly. Oh, right. After all, what else would I do? All I ever do is help Rhinon, eat, and sleep. That's the life of a noble woman, isn't it? Killian doesn't back down. Then let's go to the opera. Surprised, she shakes her head with a gentle smile. Killian, I'm truly fine. Why don't you take Rice to the opera instead? His face shifts in surprise, and for a moment, he seems taken aback. Rice? Do you really mean that? Of course. She responds with genuine warmth. I'm glad you two are close. It doesn't bother me at all. Killian's expression changes to one of disappointment. He pauses, then asks quietly, Who am I to you? She blinks, slightly thrown by the question. Who are you to me? Well, of course, you're my husband. Inside, though, she wonders if this is also a part of some test. She hesitates, then adds, Well, you're my husband on paper. We're just an arranged couple, nothing more. Marrying me was a duty for you, not something you wanted. Our marriage crushed any last hope you had for true love. But suddenly, something shifts in Killian's expression. An unknown voice seems to echo in his mind, and shadows cloud his eyes. Edith Reigelhoff envies that pure love, the voice whispers. She's desperate, like a demon, a snake. He grits his teeth, a conflicted look overtaking his features. The protagonist calls his name, sensing something is wrong. Do you hate spending time with me that much? He asks, his voice low and tense. She can see the hurt flicker across his face. I'm the one who feels jealous and desperate, he thinks, fighting an internal battle. Then, looking away, he mutters, Have you found someone else? Rhinon? Is it him? Her eyes widen in shock. What, Rhinon? What are you talking about? Wait, Killian, she says, reaching out to stop him, her hand gently resting on his face, seeing the pain in his eyes. Is that all I am to you, a husband on paper? He asks, his voice barely above a whisper. I just need to help you breed. Is that all you need from me? Killian's hand covers hers, his touch gentle but steady. Is that all you need from me? He asks, his voice soft yet filled with an intensity that sends a shiver through her. Killian, what are you? She begins, heart pounding, trying to pull her hand away. But he holds it firmly, his gaze locked onto hers, a mix of frustration and longing in his eyes. He leans closer, and before she can react, his lips meet hers in a kiss that takes her breath away. Caught in his arms, she feels a rush of emotions, surprise, confusion, and something deeper she can't quite name. She tries to pull away, but his arms encircle her, holding her close. The air between them is charged, and as he deepens the kiss, the intensity only grows. The moment escalates, feelings that were hidden now coming to the surface in a whirlwind of emotions they can no longer ignore. Next, we see a prompt window appears, its message flashing on the screen with an almost mocking cheer. Congratulations. You have completed the second condition. The protagonist lets out a deep breath, realizing this accomplishment has shaken the original author's control over the world. It feels satisfying, knowing that her small victory has disrupted the plans of this so-called god of the story. Then, we are drawn back in time to a tense moment, a memory laced with suspicion. The protagonist stands alone in a sterile room, her face illuminated by the eerie, blue glow of monitors surrounding her. Shadows ripple across her features as she murmurs, half to herself, "It looks like whoever this is really is toying with me. They know how I feel about Killian, and they're using it against me. If I hadn't made up my mind, I would never have met this condition." Still, the clarity brings a sense of pride. She's resisted the manipulation, having met the strange requirement to refuse Killian's offer 10 times. A slight smile tugs at her lips. At least this means I one-up this world's god. They must be so annoyed right now. Across another plane, beyond the protagonist's awareness, the story's influencer, the original author, watches with growing fury. How could she refuse someone she likes 10 times? If she truly loved him, wouldn't she do anything for him? Agree to his requests without hesitation? She should want him entirely, to give herself over completely. Did I get it wrong? Could it be that she doesn't love him? The thought unsettles the influencer, their authority now weakened. No one had ever reached this stage, fulfilled the conditions for the elusive level 2. If the protagonist pushes forward and meets the requirements of level 3, the original author's grip will vanish entirely. The story will diverge from its original path, unraveling into a world where the characters make their own choices, where events play out as they will, independent of the author's design. The lovely Rice, the protagonist, will one day age, and the story will not loop or pause. She will eventually live, and she will die. Realizing the threat, the influencer resolves to impose a third condition, one that will be nearly impossible to fulfill, one that will ensure their control endures. The scene transitions back with the protagonist in a softly lit room, the ambience quiet and intimate. Killian and the protagonist lay together, wrapped in elegant sheets with gentle light filtering through nearby windows. Killian, gazing at her with a teasing yet tender expression, asked, "Do you like it this much?" His question was playful but carried a hint of curiosity, as if he genuinely wanted to understand her feelings in this moment of intimacy. "No, it's just interesting," she replies, glancing at his toned figure. Killian's lips twitch. "I find your body more interesting. How can you feel so soft, so tender?" Her cheeks flush pink. "For a moment, I thought you'd squash me the way you held me so roughly." Killian looks at the protagonist with romantic eyes and kisses her on the head. This feels more real than the scripted moments of the plotline she's come to know. After a brief silence, he speaks, his voice softened with the vulnerability he rarely shows. "Edith, did you mean it when you said you don't see me as just a mate?" But she answers without hesitation, "Of course, I wouldn't." Her mind races. Why is he asking me this? Wondering if he truly cares about her opinion of him. It's not pity. Killian wouldn't go through all this trouble out of simple sympathy. And yet, she knows it's not love, either. The original plot's influence still lurks, pulling their fates in a direction she can't control. That leaves only loneliness or desire. She remembers his tragic past, his battles against his brother, the favoritism of their parents, and how even the woman he loved had eyes only for his brother. In a world that overlooks him, maybe he sees her as the only one who has ever put him first. "I know that feeling well," she thinks to herself. "I, Suna Choi, know that loneliness all too well." The scene slips back into the present as Edith looks at Killian, her eyes filled with an intensity she can't hide. She reaches out, gently placing her hand on his cheek, her voice barely a whisper. "Killian, what would I have to do for you to trust me?" Then scene shifts and we see the protagonist entered the opera hall alongside Killian, her breath hitching at the sight before her. She took a step forward, eyes wide with awe, whispering to herself, "Wow, look at this." Killian's gaze remained steady on her, a subtle hint of satisfaction flickering across his otherwise composed face. He appeared as though he'd seen this sight 1,000 times, the grandeur almost mundane to him. Yet, in her eyes, the scene sparkled with wonder, and he couldn't help but notice how the spectacle illuminated her face, bringing out a softness he rarely saw. "What a magnificent hall!" she exclaimed, her voice barely containing her excitement. Her eyes darted around, trying to absorb every detail. "Can you even hear them singing from so far away?" Watching her innocent curiosity. "You act like it's your first time at the opera hall." She turned to him, a little embarrassed. Well, it is my first time here. Killian in a surprising tone, what do you mean? This is the largest opera hall in the city. You have never been here before? Avoiding his gaze, she feels a pang of awkwardness. Here I go again, sounding like an uncultured woman, she thinks. But then she remembers Edith's memories. Edith was never allowed such freedoms. Her father had kept her from experiencing art, music, books, even the opera. Her world had been small and controlled, her spirit stifled. But now, with Killian, she feels a sense of liberation, and for the moment, she lets herself embrace in this new, shared experience, savoring the beauty of the opera hall as Killian sits beside her.
Hey, if you enjoyed this content and made it to the end of the video, click that subscribe button and be part of our adventure. Thank you so much.